How's it going, guys? So I realized I've never shown my face on camera before, so here I am in the flesh, the developer known only as Clinton. It's kind of wild. There's been a number of articles actually written about CRISPR online. I didn't even know they existed, and then I kind of just randomly stumbled across them, and it's both flattering and a little bit nerve-wracking knowing that there's people out there that actually have expectations. But it's kind of cool. It makes me almost feel like I'm some kind of enigma, like Kojima or something. Um, but yeah, it has been a while since I've uploaded. It's hard to believe it's almost been an entire year since I uploaded the last devlog. And there's a good reason as to why it's taken me this long. But I kind of want to save that stuff for the end of the video and just hop into showing you guys where CRISPR's at the moment. So without further ado, let's hop into this. So when I first started working on CRISPR, I had begun developing it in Unreal Engine version 5.1, and at the time, Unreal Engine 5 was still pretty new, and it clearly had a lot of growing pains to go through to get to be a well-performing engine. Um, and so, as I was developing it, I was encountering a lot of optimization issues. Like for instance, Lumen, which is Unreal Engine's real-time global illumination, is extremely expensive to run in indoor environments due to like the bounce lighting. And also with metahumans, simply having John's metahuman in the scene would tank the performance because they weren't very well optimized at the time. But thankfully, Epic has continued to roll out new engine versions and fix issues from the previous engine. And currently, they're on engine version 5.5. And what's really cool about Unreal Engine 5.5 is they've introduced this new feature called Megalights. And essentially, it now makes it so that using Lumen is now a viable option. It will drastically increase the performance if you have a whole bunch of lights in your scene. So you could run, say you had a project that was running at 20 frames per second, using megalights might bump it all the way up to 70, which is awesome. So now, with that, I thought it'd be a good time to update my project. However, there's just one small problem with that, and that's the fact that upgrading a project from 5.1 to 5.5 is a huge leap. And so, they tweak and they change out so many small things within the engine that when I tried to upgrade it, it completely broke my project. So, unfortunately, it left me with only three options. And the first option was I could try to salvage the project and try to narrow down where the issues were and fix them, but that could take months. Or I could essentially just skip out on 5.5 and just stick with my original engine and have a game that runs like garbage. Or the third option was to completely start over from scratch. And I was very hesitant to do that at first, but my friend kind of reminded me that I've come a long way since I started developing CRISPR, and that catching back up wouldn't be too hard for me. And so that's essentially what I did. I started over, and within 1 month, I had caught back up, and I'd also surpassed essentially where I was at the time. And that's pretty big considering that it took me an entire year to get to the point where I was at before. But now that I'm here, I'm really excited to show you guys all the new things that I've been working on. So let's start with the coolest new mechanic that I've added to the game. So one of my favorite games of all time is Dead Space, and it's what helped inspire me to make CRISPR. And in that game, there's this mechanic called kinesis, and it's essentially Isaac has the ability to manipulate gravity, and so he can like pick up objects and he can toss them at enemies and use them as projectiles. And so I knew when I began developing CRISPR that I wanted something similar to that within my game. And so what I've done is I've essentially recreated the kinesis mechanic from Dead Space, but I've adapted it to my game. And so the differences between Dead Space and my game is instead of using gravity manipulation, I'm essentially using electromagnetism for John's ability. And this is a little bit of a spoiler. At one point in the game, John, let's say, receives an augmentation, and he's able to wield this power. And so When you first get this ability, it's pretty weak. You're only really able to use it to throw small objects to distract enemies with. But as the game gets further along and you continue to upgrade it, you'll be able to pick up heavier objects and increase its power. And so you'll go from being able to toss pop cans to being able to rip off pipes and use them as like spears, or rip off a car door and use it as a shield. And I've put a lot of work into it, and it's honestly really fun and a little bit morbidly hilarious to play with. So if you hit like the main torso of an enemy, it will pin them to the wall. But if you hit like a limb, it will dismember it. But if you're really accurate with your shot, it will actually make the limb stick to whatever it's hit with, and it will kind of turn into a shish kebab. And so you can kind of make shish kebabs out of the enemy's body parts. You'll also be able to rip off mechanical parts from the augmented enemies and use them against them. So for instance, like the Biohound enemy is essentially like a hound that has a machine gun strapped to its back. You'll be able to rip that off at a certain point and activate the machine gun while you're holding it and use it against them, which I think will be a really cool mechanic for the game. And it'll be really interesting to see how I manage the balancing of all these different mechanics for the game. Because essentially what I want CRISPR to be is an amalgamation of all my favorite games, right? Like I want it to be a Resident Evil style game, I also want it to be a Souls-like game, and then I also want to add in this Dead Space mechanic to it. And, you know, how I want to balance it out is that, let's say that you want to treat it essentially just as a Souls-like game. Like, you'll have that ability to be able to just do melee combat throughout the entire game. Or if you want to play a Resident Evil style, you'll be able to do it that way. And the balancing is going to be really interesting, but I do think I have it pinned down. The next thing that I've done is I've begun working on coding all the different enemies' unique AI. The first one is one I'm actually really excited about, and it's the Tardigrade boss fight. So if you don't know, tardigrades are these microorganisms that are essentially the most resilient organism on the planet. They can withstand any immense amount of pressure. They can withstand being in space and frozen and exposed to radiation and completely revive, which is amazing. But the way I've coded his AI is that he gauges where the player is and where cars are, and it kind of makes the decision on what the tardigrade should do, if he should like charge John, or if he should try to fling a car at him, or if he should try to grab him and then toss him. And so what's cool is like if you avoid like the brunt of its main charge attack and you get clipped, John will get sent flying into the air and he'll end up dropping his gun on the ground from the impact of hitting the ground. And so you're kind of like left with the decision, like, do I risk trying to grab the gun or do I run away? And so there's kind of this risk versus reward factor that I want to add to the fight. And the last time I showed you guys this, the cars were essentially just a simulation, but now here they're actually running in real time and they're fully destructible. The next AI that I've been working on is the Snatcher enemy, and the Snatcher is essentially a combination of a lamprey, which is this deep sea fish, but it's also kind of terrifying, mixed with a Japanese spider crab and an anglerfish. And so if you know anglerfish, they use a bioluminescent lure to kind of lure in their prey, and I want to add that kind of aspect to this creature. And what's unique about this enemy is it crawls up into nooks and vents in the ceiling, and it dangles its lure down, and the lure kind of resembles just a regular light bulb. So essentially, if you're not paying close enough attention, you're going to get snatched up by this creature by the head and decapitated. But if you're observant enough and you notice that it isn't like just a light bulb and you sneak around the side, you can actually shoot up at him and he'll drop down. But I think this enemy will give a really good jump scare to people who aren't expecting it, and I'm excited to continue working on it. Lastly, I've also been working on the augmented Biohound. The model that I'm using right now is just a placeholder, but you'll have a mounted machine gun on its back, and this enemy will be really dynamic in how it fights John. It has its basic melee and kind of tackle attacks, but it also, with its gun, it will fire and strafe around you, and so you kind of have to be on the move constantly when you're fighting this enemy. And then also he'll do the zigzag pattern, to kind of avoid your projectile attacks. So I think in narrow corridors, he's going to pose a real threat. Now, for the reason as to why I went on a long hiatus, well, in the last devlog video I uploaded, I had explained that I had got my first game development job, and a lot has happened since then. For starters, I released my first game ever. It's called Lockdown, and it's a VR horror multiplayer experience. And to be completely honest, it was an absolute nightmare to develop for. But I've learned so much working on that project, and I think it's going to better prepare me for creating a larger scope project like CRISPR. And so I also somehow became a lead and co-owner of a development studio. It's a long story, which I will save for another time, but I'm very proud and thankful to have the position that I do. And that's what's taken up the bulk of my time, is leading the studio. As for CRISPR, CRISPR is my passion project, and so that's not something that I will be working on with the studio. I want to have the full creative control over that, so it will continue to be a solo project. I've also worked on a couple other passion projects as well. I coded a turn-based RPG system entirely from scratch, and the reason I created that is because I really wanted a challenge to help develop my skills. And so I didn't watch any tutorials, I didn't ask for any help. I wanted to take all the skills that I had learned as a developer and try to figure it out and create it myself, and that's exactly what I did. And it was really fun to work on, and I plan on using it for a future project that's kind of like a Pokemon / Persona style game that I want to make. And I'll probably end up listing it on the Fab Marketplace as well to give other developers a framework as well as help fund my projects. But yeah, that's currently where I'm at, guys. Sorry again for the hiatus. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I promise I won't take another year to make a new upload. But yeah, have a good day, and I'll catch you in the next one.